Welcome back. Let's just dive right in. Now, I wanted to approach something a little different and something I've been immersing myself in here lately. I picked up a copy of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, and having finished it, I have some thoughts. Now, that being said, I doubt that I can come up with any revolutionary takes on a book that's already been analyzed by literary scholars and readers much smarter than me. So I won't bother, but this book did kindle a desire to read more. So naturally, I looked to other pieces by McCarthy. I was familiar with both No Country for Old Men and The Road, but only at a surface value. I hadn't even seen The Road till recently, but I watched it, along with a rewatch of No Country, and I picked up both books. So while I'm no scholar, I do now have a decent understanding of the three stories. I began to wonder if they fit together somehow. Obviously not officially in the way that McCarthy's Border Trilogy is structured, but I kept noticing similarities in the motivation of the characters and the state of the world around them. So let's see what we can dig up. Now, a disclaimer. This will not be a detailed analysis of these three stories, and I won't be giving a complete synopsis of the plots. If that's what you're looking for, then I have 3 books, 2 movies, and a hell of a long YouTube video for you to check out. What I'm going to be doing is touching on the major points of each story and trying to convince you of 2 things. 1, that these stories all take place in the same universe and should be considered a trilogy. And 2, all 3 of them, whether obviously or not, represent the Western. Now for our first story, Blood Meridian. This book is indisputably a Western. It fits every criteria, the landscape, the characters, 1849. It's cut and dry. Now there are, of course, nuances within the story regarding the character motivations and the particular events of the tale, but its backdrop is unapologetically the West. Now for those unfamiliar, those that need a quick refresh, the story follows a boy, only ever addressed as the kid, as he wanders from Tennessee down to Texas and eventually Mexico, where he falls in with a band of renegade soldiers with a singular mission: to carry on with the already concluded Mexican-American War. The kid is eventually beset upon by Native Americans and is later arrested by the Mexican government. He then finds himself in the company of the Glanton Gang, led by John Glanton, leader of a group of headhunters contracted by Mexican officials to kill Indians and collect their scalps. Now, violence ensues, the judge gives several sermons, and the story reaches really the only logical conclusion. Now, at one point, the kid stumbles on a hermit living in the woods. He speaks on man's ability to commit evil. The book says this: "You can find meanness in the least of creatures, but when God made man, the devil was at his elbow. A creature that can do anything, make a machine, and a machine to make the machine, an evil that can run itself 1,000 years. No need to tend it." Now, I think this ties directly into The Road, but we'll come back to that. Along with this, we have the judge, and perhaps the most famous part of the book, outside of the violence, is the portrayal of Judge Holden. He gives a speech to the gang one night regarding the nature of war and how it's the ultimate game, an event in which defeat means death can't be more absolute. He sees it as pure. Now, I don't think this video needs me to recite it, but honestly, I can't resist, so I hope this doesn't break the flow too bad. The judge says this: "It makes no difference what men think of war," said the judge. "War endures. As well ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. And that is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way." And he continues: "Suppose 2 men at cards with nothing to wager save their lives. Who has not heard such a tale? A turn of the card. The whole universe for such a player has labored clanking to this moment, which will tell if he is to die at that man's hand or that man at his. What more certain validation of a man's worth could there be This enhancement of the game to its ultimate state admits no argument concerning the notion of fate. The selection of one man over another is a preference absolute and irrevocable. And it is a dull man indeed who would reckon so profound a decision without agency or significance, either one. In such games as have for their stake the annihilation of the defeated, the decision is quite clear. This man, holding this particular arrangement of cards in his hand, is thereby removed from existence. This is the nature of war, whose stake is at once the game and the authority and the justification. Seen so, war is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will which, because it binds them, is therefore forced to select. War is the ultimate game because war is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. War is God. Now, the judge is speaking here about the purity of violence, the absolution of death, how nothing else seems to matter, the sport of it. It's a violent morale which is followed by many more characters that we will come to see, but it will never be put quite so elegantly. Now, much has been said regarding the depravity and the grotesquerie of the story. It's the main thing you'll hear about it. It would seem to be the reason that the book is considered unfilmable, and I won't sugarcoat it. There's some rough stuff in there. I personally wasn't too disturbed by it. I've heard it caused people to not finish the book because of the violence, but besides a few scenes of particularly detailed carnage, I made it through all right. Maybe I'm desensitized to it because you can watch murder videos on Twitter, but that's neither here nor there. The point of the book is to showcase the depravity and capacity for evil among men, the responsibility that we have to ourselves to be present in our lives. The kid in the story is like driftwood. He floats from place to place without any real purpose, falling in with whatever group will keep him fed and alive. He has no values or morals regarding the things and people that he's involved with. Whether he's truly complacent or complicit is largely up for interpretation within the story, but he is undoubtedly present. And I think the fundamental lesson of the story is about the hazard of being aimless, to not have goals or aspirations, something to work towards, being in the passenger seat of your own life. And the kid's inability to take the wheel is what leads to his eventual fate. The judge puts it plainly in the final pages of the book, as he seems to categorize all people within two columns: bears that dance, bears that don't. Now, this book is the foundation, an establishment of the fundamentals from which the rest of the McCarthy verse is built upon. Now, if we take a good jump forward to 1980, we can see the results of initiative in your life. Within No Country for Old Men, we follow three main characters: Llewellyn Moss, Anton Chigurh, and Sheriff Bell. Each man has taken lead in their lives and enacted their will on the world as they see fit. Llewellyn stumbles upon a drug deal gone bad and decides to take the money and run, with Chigurh following suit to reclaim the funds and Sheriff Bell trailing behind, attempting to enact some form of law and order. Now, Moss is not like the kid. He takes agency. He makes smart plays in an effort to evade his pursuers. His motivations are both that of greed and duty. He takes a dying man some water, but only after he's taken the cash. He tries to protect his wife from the trouble he's found, but in truth, he's in over his head. Llewellyn is an everyman, thrust into the world of killers, and he is not at all prepared for the force that is after him. Anton Chigurh in this story is the wind, an ever-present and always moving terminator. He's been given a task, and regardless of the difficulties in the way, he will achieve it. He lives by chance. He has embraced this world of evil and chosen to move with it, while Moss pushes back. Anton leaves lives up to chance. They're meaningless to him. It matters not to him who lives or dies, just that the job gets done. Everything else is just a coin flip to him. Look at his confrontation with Moss's wife at the end of the film. He tracks her down and throws her life up to chance. Not because she's the job or even out of malice or spite towards Llewellyn. He's simply keeping his word. He is an evolution of what the outlaws were in Blood Meridian. He's in the same profession, money for blood, but he keeps his wits about him. No drunken tirades or burning the governor's furniture, just cold calculation, weighing risk and reward. There is a part where Chigurh needlessly kills a bird while he's driving by him, which is similar to Glanton when he's shopping for new guns. So the murderous tendency still resides there. It's just more subdued. And then there's Sheriff Bell, the law. He gives several monologues showing his concern for what the world is becoming. They're featured in the movie, but the book has them more frequently and detailed. He doesn't recognize the world around him, can't understand it. The violence that he sees as a lawman, people's propensity for it, and especially their lack of remorse. He constantly references the old-timers and how he perceives them. Sheriff Bell says this: "Some of the old-time sheriffs wouldn't even carry a firearm. A lot of folks find that hard to believe, but it's a fact. I always liked to hear about the old-timers, never missed a chance to do so. The old-time concern that the sheriffs had for their people has been watered down some. Can't help but feel it." He seems to miss a simpler time where people weren't gunned down in the street and the law reigned supreme. But what Bell realizes when speaking to his cousin at the end of the movie, and what we already know from Blood Meridian, is that violence is not a new occurrence. Men have always committed violence against each other, and people have always been in danger. Right at the end, the sheriff tells a story about his dreams. He and his father ride through the mountains on horseback, and his father carries a fire with him. His father goes on ahead of him, and Bell reflects on it. As he loses sight of both his father and the flame, he feels assured that somewhere up ahead his father will be there, stoking the fire. The Sheriff Bell's father, who was never as old as Bell is now, represents the hope that good men will carry on, to carry the fire that kills the shadows in a dark world. It reminds me of a story that the judge tells. The gang stumbles upon some structures in the desert made by a people who no longer exist. He remarks on them as frozen gods and tells a story about a traveler, a man killed, and how the son of that man never saw his father struggle. He only heard the great stories told of his father's triumph, never of his shortcomings. He lives in contest to a perfect idol he cannot hope to imitate. Much like Sheriff Bell living in the idol of lawmen of old, he can't possibly live up to the facade he's created in his own mind. Now, the basis of the story is in the title. There is no country for old men. There never has been. The bad guys win, and we're left wondering what to make of it. Which of the paths is best? To fight against the way of the world, to embrace it, or to fear it? And what of my overarching question? Is this a Western? I could understand an argument either way, but I think the purest answer is yes. If nothing else, it's a deconstruction of a Western film. I mean, what's more Western than Captain Woodrow F. Call saddling up to chase a bandit across Texas, to try to save a man from himself? Llewellyn's on his own. He's a lone ranger with nothing but his wits and a sawed-off shotgun to keep him safe. Anton seems to be the outlier of the genre, a cold and remorseless killer, hunting not only his prey, but also anyone unlucky enough to land on tails. However, I would argue he's the only character in the story that would fit with the Blood Meridian crowd. Now, what does this say about the fragile stilts that we've placed under the genre of Western? The term neo-Western is thrown around a lot when discussing this film. Neo just meaning new, but the term represents a rebirth of the Western, a new way of looking at them, a new way of showcasing Western stories. Can you take some of the most famous Western stories, fast forward and alter the setting and still consider them Westerns? Well, no. A perfect example is Four Brothers, the Marky Mark movie. It's a remake of John Wayne's Sons of Katie Elder, Some of the minor details changed, but it's essentially the same plot. But no one argues that Four Brothers should be considered a Western. The setting, especially the time period, does play a role. But I've come to this conclusion. If you set a story in the time period of the Old West, there's lots of locations you can set the tale within. But if you fast forward, the area shrinks. The modern day Western is very limited on where exactly it can take place. Cowboy country, if you will. The movie must take place in cowboy country. The only real difference between then and now, there's a lot less of it. So on the red dirt of West Texas and over the Mexican border, cowboy country. A grizzled lawman trying to save a desperate and honest thief from the evil forces trying to stop him, cowboy story. So I stand before you like an oak. No Country for Old Men is a Western. So that brings us to the precipice of our trilogy, The Road. Now, I know this is going to be a tough sell. I'm not even certain that I've convinced myself at this point, but let's dive into the details together. We'll see where we come up. Now, I was aware that this story existed, but I hadn't really looked into it before this. I picked up the book along with No Country, but when I finished it and the film, both left me with the same emotion, which I suppose is a testament to the film adaptation. It's a pretty dreadful tale with only a few moments of anything other than despair. A father and his son are attempting to survive in an unspecified apocalypse and make it to the southern coast for warmer weather. Cannibalism is a big staple of the film, as pretty well all the plants and animals have died. Several times, the protagonist will meet someone and gauge them on if they've eaten human flesh or not. It's a line crossed that seems to show if the stranger is too far gone. Now, for the first time in the McCarthy trilogy of violence and hopelessness, we find a deciding factor between good guys and bad guys. This distinction is brought up often by the child who has never known anything but the wasteland they inhabit. He's much like the kid in Blood Meridian, forced into a world of violence with no choice but to embrace it. This child, however, doesn't let the world corrupt him. He advocates for the humanity in the people they find, even convincing his father to show mercy. In opposition to the kid some 150 years before, he's not whisked away through the horrors of his surroundings. He resists them. He chooses another path, and when looking at the end of these two stories, McCarthy clearly shows which path he advocates for. Blood Meridian's protagonist lives violently and dies the same way, while the child in The Road searches for hope. And that's what he finds. Now, as I said, the event that caused the world to end is never specified, but my thought, and truthfully what fits my narrative the best, is that the events of The Road take place in a nuclear winter. Now, there's really no details that lean one way or another as to what caused it, but I think if we cast our minds back, a certain hermit in the woods may have clued us in. Man is a creature that can do anything, make a machine to cast evil for 1,000 years, no need to tend it. The statement could be referenced to a lot of things, but it fits quite nicely in the definition of nuclear war. When a gun is fired, the bullet stays in the air for less than a second, and once it hits the ground, it's harmless. But a nuclear bomb, when it hits the ground, it's just the beginning. It would seem as though man's ultimate practice has brought upon his ultimate destruction. Now, I had the fortune of reading these 3 books in this order, and while making my way through The Road, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had all led up to this, the war that men craved, as the judge had prophesied, and the result of it, as Chigurh had questioned. If the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule? Now, McCarthy has always played with the idea of destiny, of fate, and I think as he wrote this book, he saw the fate of man. He saw the only outcome. The book says this: he walked out in the gray light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world. The cold, relentless circling of the interstate earth, darkness implacable. The blind dogs of the sun in their running, the crushing black vacuum of the universe. And somewhere, two hunted animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover. Borrowed time, and borrowed world, and borrowed eyes in which to sorrow it. Now, McCarthy sees this as the only fate of humanity, destruction. But in this destruction lies hope. The father, as he travels with his son, tells him of the fire that they carry. He explains that it's not literal, but symbolic and within them. It's a great reference to how Sheriff Bell sees his father. 3 full books spanning over 100 years, showcasing the violence of man, the depravity of greed, and when it finally reaches its precipice, the destruction of the world, a man carries hope, and a father tries to instill it in his son. So the Western aspects of this story are kind of tough to spot. Maybe they're not there at all. The plot in and of itself can certainly be Western. A father trying to protect his son as they trek across a desolate wasteland in search of a better life. It's very synonymous with the travel out west that so many people took. Lack of resources, having to make do and survive. No central government to provide aid, just a man and his wits. Very similar to the circumstances that Llewellyn Moss finds himself in. But as I mentioned earlier, there's no cowboy country. Now, is this the defining feature? Maybe. But I ask you this. As the land of the West has shrunken and shifted over the years, who's to say that we won't look back on this story in the future and assign it something else? So the road isn't a Western, in my opinion. But maybe one day it will be. Now, what does it all mean? I don't know, but I have some ideas. These 3 books fit very nicely into a story structure, the 3 acts. Act 1, Blood Meridian. You set a book in the lawless era to better illustrate the violence, rampant violence, sanctioned violence. You can see what men will become if murder is both acceptable and profitable, feeding into their most basic animalistic desires and just how easy it is to become a monster if you're not aware, if you're not present in your own life. The kid in the story reminds me of Jake Spoon. Maybe he wasn't a bad guy, but you are who you surround yourself with. And Gus put it best. I wish you'd have taken that chance a little earlier, Jake. A man that would go along with 5 killings is taking his leaving a little slow. And who might this be? Great segue. Act 2, No Country for Old Men. Sheriff Bell believes in a fantasy, the good old days. Even in a modern world, the violence of man cannot be stifled. Killers roam as killers always have. And it seems insurmountable to stand against it. The irony of a lawman who doesn't believe law will prevail. And the story shows us, often it doesn't. And this uncapped violence will build and build until it reaches a climax. Act 3, The Road. The desolation of man. We see through these stories where the violence gets us, how it will lead to the end of us all. For it is war that swallows up game, player, all. Now, where does this leave us? With hope. Hope is a fire that we must carry within us. Without it, what's left?